What's going on? This is Ryan with Automatic Comics, and up next I am going to talk about a few interesting sales I saw recently for restored comics. We'll also go over a couple of the restored comics that I have in my collection. Stay tuned. Alright, so before we get started, please remember to hit that like button and hit the subscribe button if you'd like to see more content like this. So, like I do every week, I was watching the weekly Heritage Comic Auction, and there were a few interesting restored book sales that I saw that I thought would be kind of fun to talk about, and talk about some trends that I've been seeing recently with restored books. And if you watched my last unboxing video, I do buy restored books, especially when I'm considering books in the Golden Age. I'm definitely not just buying any restored book. I do really consider the rarity of the book, how difficult it is to find it, how often I see that book come up for sale, and just the general value as well. I'm also pricing those books out. Now, pricing restored books is much more challenging than Universal because they don't sell as often. You kind of have to make some guesses, but that's what you have to do with Golden Age books in general anyway, so you kind of get used to it. But first, I just thought I would show some of the restored books that I have so you can kind of see what types of books I'm talking about that I would normally go after. And from my unboxing video, this was one of them. This was Blue Bolt number 115, which is an L.B. Cole skull cover, just awesome Golden Age book. And this one is a C4, so color touch, lots of Sharpie likely on the cover. Then the next book was this one here, which was Detective Comics number 7, which is now the oldest book that I have in my collection from September of 1937. This one has much more impactful restoration. This is professionally restored. The other one was amateur restoration. This is color touch, pieces added, tear seals, cleaned, and reinforced. So a lot more than just the color touch. But when you've got a book that there are only 20 graded copies total on the census, you don't get too picky about the amount of color touch or whatever else that's been done to it. If it comes up for sale, which it rarely ever does, that's really what is one of the driving factors for me when I'm looking for these books. It's really, I look at how often these books actually sell. I mean, if they only come up for sale once, twice a year, maybe less than that, that's really the type of book that I will often consider for purchasing when it's restored. Also the price, because you obviously usually will get the book more affordably if it's restored. I'm going to talk about one example that I saw this weekend where that was not the case, and but that's also often a reason where it makes a book that is generally very expensive a little less expensive. So the third book that I have that's restored, and I think this may have been the first restored book I ever bought, is World's Finest number 3. And this is a unassuming cover of Batman, Robin, and Superman, 1941, but this is the first appearance of the Scarecrow. And so this is a pretty big key issue. This one is a B2. This one is also color touch on the cover. The B means that it's somewhere between amateur and professional, so it's probably something like crayon or something like that that's on the cover. But I don't know exactly, but you can see there's a lot of creasing and things, but there's not a lot of white showing, and so somebody likely touched up a lot of this. It's always kind of tough to tell, but you can see where you'd expect to see white. That's one of the things you should look for with restored books if you're buying them raw. If you see places that you would think you would see white and you don't, that is probably a sign that there was something done to it where there's some color touch. But this one, it's also, part of it was first appearance of Scarecrow, big Batman villain, a expensive book, and being able to pick it up in a restored, nice presenting copy where it's just color touch, I was pretty happy to be able to do that. And then the last two that I have are actually raw, and I believe it's just glue on the spine for these ones, but these are Haunt of Fear number 15 and number 17. Haunt of Fear number 15 is actually the first issue of Haunt of Fear. They changed the title. And then Haunt of Fear number 17 is the origin of the Haunt of Fear, Vault of Horror, and Crypt of Terror. and so kind of a minor key in the EC Haunt of Fear type runs. So these ones are relatively uncommon. You rarely see them come up for sale. There's at any given time 0 to 1 copies usually available on eBay, which is a pretty good way to actually assess how hard it is to find a book. I mean, if you look at eBay, eBay has thousands and thousands of sellers. There are a lot of people selling books all the time, and if you have books that are even big Silver Age keys, there's usually a ton of copies out there. Amazing Spider-Man 1, Amazing Fantasy 15, Tales of Suspense 39. Like, those books generally have a bunch of copies out there. Books like this often have 0 or just a couple. And so that's really how you can give a rough estimate of how tough it is to find one of these books, is if you just don't see them up on eBay at all. So as you can tell, I do buy restored books, and those were all Golden Age. So that is really where I will consider restored books. I'm not really going to look for them when we're talking about silver. Maybe if it was a really big key, like an Amazing Fantasy 15 or something like that, to just get it to be a little more affordable. But for Golden Age, generally that's where I'm looking for these restored books. Because, like I mentioned, sometimes you just take what you can get. If they're only selling once or twice a year, maybe less than that, if you see that book pop up for sale, that might be your only chance in the next 12 months to be able to even find a copy. And there's no guarantee that you'll catch the sale of the next one when it actually comes up. So that is a big thing that can drive those restored book prices. Now, there are certain types of restoration that I personally don't care for. I really don't like trimming. That's the biggest one. Just something about it. I don't like seeing the trimming done to the book. But for me, that's really the main one that I try to steer clear of. Now, like I'll talk about with these sales that I saw, I am definitely seeing more demand recently for restored Golden Age books, because as I mentioned, I've been seeing prices go up in Golden Age books and the demand going up for these Golden Age books. And so when there aren't a lot of available copies out there, people will buy what they can get. And so if you can get a restored book, if that's the one that's out there, that's what people are going for. Now, there has been a stigma for, I think, quite a while about restored books. I'm not really sure where it came from, because I've talked to a few people, and restored books previously were pretty common. People didn't really have this big negative view of them. I almost wonder if it came from the grading process, from CGC grading them and putting these different types of labels on it, and where it really just makes it look so much different from a universal graded copy or a signature series copy, where they get these names like the green label of death or the purple label of death for the restored books and for the qualified books. And I just wonder if that is part of it that has driven that. But like I said, regardless, I have been seeing changes in that. It seems recently where I'm seeing people pay more for these restored books and go after these books. So with that, the first one that really caught my attention was, I'll pop the book in up over here. Now, this was a Flash 104 CBCS 4.0 moderate to extensive restoration. It was professional restoration. Sold for $1,620. Now, if you look at that type of restoration compared to CGC, this would have been a A4, because A is the CGC professional and moderate to extensive is 4. And so there's a lot of restoration on this book. I mean, basically the restoration included moderate color touch on cover, pieces added to the cover and interior, cover reinforced, spine split sealed, tear seals, cover cleaned and reglossed, interior lightened, and moderate amount of tape on the interior. So quite a bit done to this book. Now, part of the reason that this one specifically stuck out to me is I have a copy of that book, and it is one of my favorite books in my collection. And so this is my copy. So I have a Universal 3.0. And part of the reason I really like this book is I'm not a huge fan of Golden Age Flash. I don't like that character. But I do like Hawkman, and Flash, as you can see, is not on this cover. And it's this really cool bright red cover with, you know, these yellow kind of like tracings of different demons or beings or whatever it might be on there. And so I really like this cover. It was a rare book, and so just I thought a cool book to pick up. And so when I saw that 4.0 with moderate to extensive restoration sell for more than what I had paid for my 3.0 Universal. That really did stick out to me because that was a big sale for that book. Now, one thing I'll also note on that Flash 104 is that that was a white pages copy, but don't pay too much attention to page quality in restored books a lot of the time, because in the description to this restoration it says interior lightened. It's actually something that you can do, that some of the restoration can do, is you can actually improve the page quality. And so it's not nearly as big of a deal in a restored book like that if it's white pages versus some other type of page quality. Now the question is, what drove up the price of this book so high? I think the biggest thing really is rarity. This is a book that only sells a couple times a year. You will not almost ever find this book popping up on eBay. You will occasionally, rarely see it pop up on one of these auction sites. There was actually a Promise Collection book that sold earlier this year, really high grade copy. I don't remember, like a 9.0 or 9.2, something like that, for a ton of money. But that is, I think, the big driving factor of this, because if you're somebody that's trying to put together, say, a Golden Age Flash run, and you only get 2 chances per year to pick up a copy to fill in that spot, that rare spot in your collection, you're going to be willing to pay a lot for it, regardless of if it is restored or not. So really, I think this is a take what you can get situation, and a couple people really wanted that book, at least a couple people, and it got bid up to a strong sale of $1,620. Now, this second sale was actually the one that was probably the most surprising to me that I saw, and this is Mr. Mystery number 11 with a CGC 2.5 C1 restoration, so amateur restoration, small amount of glue on the spine, sold for $1,440. Now, this is a pretty famous cover, but this was a monster sale. This was a record sale for this book as a restored book, above the Universal sales. Prior 2.5 Universal sale was from May of 2020, and it was $680. A 2.0 Universal sold for $413 on October 14th. So this went for over 3 times as much as that 2.0 that sold about a week ago. And so I don't know if it was just a little overexcitement about that book, but yeah, I mean, it's a small amount of glue on the spine. You can definitely have this restoration removed. C1, small amount of glue, you can have that removed, but with that glue there, it's likely going to require that some of the cover is taken off, a little bit is removed to actually get rid of that glue. And so it will likely come back a 2.0. Maybe you'll be able to keep that 2.5, but very likely it'll come back a 2.0, because it also might be on there because it was reattaching the cover. And so now that you've removed the glue, you have a detached cover. You also probably had to remove some of the paper, probably a likely lower grade. And a 2.0 just sold for $413. And so not only did you spend $1,440 on it, you now also have to spend the time and money to get that restoration removed and get it regraded. So this was a huge sale. And being a restored book, I mean, just a monster sale for that book. So it really, really stuck out to me. But again, this is one of those cases of rarity. At least when I checked, there were no copies. I don't think there are any copies of this book available on eBay. There are only 56 total copies on the census. And like I've mentioned in some other videos, I've been seeing a huge amount of demand for Golden Age books, specifically things like pre-code horror and big covers, important covers in pre-code horror. And this is one of those. And so a book that only sells a few times per year, and it's got one of those, quote, key horror covers, then it's something that when it came up, someone decided, hey, I don't want to wait another 6 months, 8 months, a year before another copy pops up for sale. I'm going after this one. And so drove up that price and set a record for that grade in any type of label. So a very impressive sale, and that one was a really surprising sale for me. All right, now the third restored book that I saw come up for sale that I wanted to talk about was this is just an example of a extremely high demand book and the amount of money that people will spend for restored books. Now this is Detective Comics number 36 with a CGC 7.5 restored, restoration as B2, sold for $10,800. Now, obviously, a 7.5 is an extremely nice presenting copy of this very early book, very early appearance of Batman, and 1940. I mean, early 1940, not quite into the 30s yet. This is a big book. It's also a key. It's the first appearance of Hugo Strange, who is Batman's first major villain. So you've got a key component of this book. You've got one of the earliest appearances of Batman, and the restoration, it was pieces added to the cover, spine split sealed to cover, cover reinforced, and then staples replaced. Now, to me, the big one on here is that staples replaced, because once those staples are replaced, you're kind of out of luck with getting back to a blue label copy, because CGC will not give you a blue label with staples replaced. At least I have never seen one. And so that's a downside with that type of restoration, is that you're stuck with that purple label regardless. You can't undo that. But it was likely that those staples were I'm guessing those staples were rusty. That's usually the reason you would do this, and it's as a means to preserve the book. You take out the rusty staples, put in newer, or at least not rusting staples. A lot of times, if it's better restoration, they'll use staples from the time period, but they replace those staples so that then you don't have that continued rust migration in the book. Which, with a book like this, where there are only 85 total copies on the census, and super early Batman, high demand book, preserving that book is a pretty high priority, I would say, for a lot of people, because they know there's only so many copies of it out there still. Now, for what this book sold for, a 7.5 Universal would sell for many, many times more than this book. Now, that's the thing you have to be really aware of when you're talking about restored books. As the grade goes up for a restored book, the price separation from the Universal graded copy increases. And so a lot of people like to use some type of rule of thumb where they'll say, like a restored book sells for half of what the Universal copy sells for. That is not true. That is true at basically 1 point in the grade for the book. You'll often see at 0.5s, a restored 0.5 with color touch will sell for the same as a 0.5 blue label, because there's really no difference. I mean, you could have that color touch removed and it's going to still be a 0.5. It's going to look probably almost exactly the same. Not a big deal. But if you have a 9.6 with moderate color touch on the cover, somebody probably filled in a whole bunch of spine ticks, maybe a big crease, something like that. And so now you've got something where if that color touch is removed, maybe it drops down to a 6. And so that 9.4 price versus what it would be with that removed is extremely different. And so you can't really use a rule of thumb for pricing restored books. In this case, a 2.0 sold for $8,200 in May of 2020. And so this one sold for $10,800. So it sold for more than a 2.0 Universal copy. But a 6.0, the last sale for a 6.0, which is the closest I could find to this, was December of 2020 for $30,000. And so a 7.5, I would guess probably in today's prices would sell for $50,000, something like that, maybe even more, because as you get up to these higher grades, the prices start to accelerate really fast. And so maybe it's a $50,000-$60,000 book, and a Universal in a 7.5 sold here for $10,800. So it sold for a sixth or a seventh of that Universal price. But if this had, say, been a 0.5 or a 1, 2, something like that, it would probably sell from anywhere from 75% to 50% of that Universal value. So it's really something where you just have to have some experience pricing books, seeing how these books generally sell, and there's still going to be things that surprise you. I mean, that Mr. Mystery 11 selling for a new record in grade as a restored book. You never know what's going to happen with some of these really rare books that just don't come up for sale very often. And these are some of those examples. You've got that Flash 104 selling for near record price within the grade. And then you've got that Mr. Mystery 11 selling for a record price. And then you've got this Detective Comics 36 breaking 5 figures, selling for over $10,000 for a restored book. So as the demand for these Golden Age books, these rare books, continues to increase, I see the demand for restored books, qualified books, those books that aren't the standard Universal Blue labels really starting to increase because people are just going to take what they can get. So let me know, do you have any restored books in your collection? Tell me about them in the comments. Are there any books that you would consider picking up that are restored? Certain types of restoration that you maybe never buy, or ones that you would prefer? Let me know. So I hope you found this video interesting, saw some cool books, maybe some books you haven't seen before. If you did enjoy this, please hit that like button, hit the subscribe button if you'd like to see more content like this. I've got more videos over here if you'd like to watch some of my other videos, and the subscription button right here if you'd like to subscribe to the channel. I would really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next video.